My name is Caroline Gonda. I'm a Fellow and Director of Studies in English at St Catherine's College, and I teach on a paper about literature from 1660 to 1870. I teach the tragedy paper, which does Greek tragedy, Shakespearean tragedy and lots of other things. I teach practical criticism and critical practice, and from 2020 I'll be teaching a paper called Love, Gender, Sexuality, 1740 to 1824 in the English faculty. So my route into queer studies, I think, was after I came out, which was in 1990, and I became interested in what I hadn't been looking at and what I hadn't been looking for, and looking for stories that I connected with and that I felt reflected my experience or spoke to it in some ways. So I probably began that work in 1990, but have been doing it more steadily since the late 90s. The research that I do has taken lots of different routes, and some of it is about what I suppose I would call queer reception. It's about what people do with their reading, whether that's in terms of authors that they quote from and how they make up a patchwork of quotations that constitutes an identity for them, or about rewriting, say, some of the queerer elements of Shakespeare's plays. So I did a talk for the English Reunion Day at St Catherine's that was about the fictional afterlives of Shakespearean cross-dressed heroines and the boy actors who played them, and that went from mid-18th century novels to 21st century fan fiction about Twelfth Night and As You Like It. And I think these are about conversations and connections between texts, and the ways that people's reading can be transformed and can transform them as well. I can think of one particular incident from early in my queer teaching, which was that I was lecturing on lesbian literature and talking about social conditions as part of that. And afterwards a lesbian student came up to me and said that some of the men at the back of the lecture had been making extremely homophobic comments which had upset her. And I thought, I have to do something about this, I have to address this. And so the next session of the course I took time to address this, and the two straight colleagues, one male, one female, that I was co-teaching the course with absolutely did not want to be involved in this. So I haven't encountered anything quite as full-on as that, but I think that although I did tackle it well, it leaves a mark. It makes you more cautious sometimes about what you teach and how you teach. And some of the texts that I teach are not that easily available, and that's part of the problem as well. Or some of the texts that I work on are not that easily available, particularly if I'm doing the work in the 18th century. So it'll be interesting to see how we manage this new course in the English faculty, because there are certainly things that I want them to read that are not in easily available editions. So we may be using online texts or having to think about how we provide them. Here I think about something that a student said to me recently, which was about a session that we'd done on mostly queer poetry and how important it felt to be seen and validated in having a queer perspective on literature. I think it's important for students who have a queer perspective to have that in the curriculum, but I also think it's important for everyone. It's important for students who don't share that perspective, maybe haven't thought about it or are opposed to it as well. I work in the humanities, and it's about our humanness. It's about being properly human and recognised as such. I think for me that's still a work in progress, and it's something that I'm thinking about. It's not just a matter of what you put on a reading list, but it's also about the sorts of conversations and connections that you make between texts, some of which will be very marked as queer and about queerness, and some of which may be by queer authors, but where their sexuality is not the main point of what you're talking about, but you still try to find a way to bring that in. Another thing that I'm interested in is stories that have been hidden or just under the radar, or at the edge of a narrative. So one of the first pieces of queer work that I did was about a character in a late novel by Mary Shelley, who the narrator tells us is more made to be loved by her own sex than by the opposite one. And at the end of the narrative, the narrator says, we can't tell her story, not in a few tame lines. So there's this kind of wild zone, as Elaine Showalter would say, that this lesbian character inhabits, that a story that can't yet be told, that the author somehow knows is there, but that the novel doesn't have room for.